I think. If we have a sibling, we grow up in exactly in the same environment. So our brother, sister, we have the same parents, the same household, we maybe even go to the same school, and yet we realize we're completely opposite. So, for example, my brother is very much an extrovert person, and sometimes I'm leaning a little bit more introvert. So I'm kind of like recharging in the quietness. I love when everything is just quiet and not so bubbly. And my brother is exactly the opposite. He is super bubbly, always out and about. And I was thinking, like, how could it be that we have exactly the same environment, the same genes, and how is it that we are so different? And more relatedly, here in the baby lab, we've seen so many babies coming in and families. And it's incredible how different they are. So even though they have exactly the same age, they're coming kind of like maybe from similar backgrounds or something, each baby is just so individual. And you can see that from very early on. Even kind of like in a 2, 3 month old baby, you can see they have their own, so to say, characteristics. So some of them are quieter, some of them are more kind of like shy, I would say. Some others are very, very open to new experiences and always searching for new stuff.
So it came from like siblings, and I see that, like, I know with my own siblings and my own children, they, coming from the same genetic, but there is such different
Putting it out.
innate traits that kind of occur in children naturally. Um, I guess my research looks a little bit at that as well, but looking a little bit more in preschoolers. And I got really interested, the more that I studied psychology, that preschoolers, when we see them in the lab, they're so different to maybe what their younger brother and sister is as well. So I guess that's why I really wanted to understand their language, and how that temperament can affect how they talk and socialize as well. So it's quite important, a foundation, I guess, that the language, which you would know as well with all those fancy linguistic words in your bio. So I did mention, so after my own 3 children as well, I thought I knew what to expect when I had child number one and then child number two, and they're something like 16, 14, and 7 now. And I just thought I knew everything that was going on when I had my kids. But I imagine a lot of parents watching now as well, looking at this, and they sometimes look at their baby and they think, where did this come from? Where did their temperament, or it's just something that they weren't expecting. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that normal?
It is absolutely normal, Sheena. And I think that is what a lot of parents are always worried about. Is it normal? Am I doing everything right? And we can assure you, you're doing everything right. So as long as you create an environment that is loving and supporting the needs of your kid, you're doing everything right. And temperament is normal. So just some babies are a little bit more fussy than others. It has nothing to do that you're doing a bad job or some in that regard. But also, where's it coming from? So we know a lot of things are genetics. So if you are a more introvert person, it's also more likely maybe that your baby is going to be a bit more introverted. Doesn't need to be. So there's no, of course, with everything, there's no always kind of like, oh, if this, then that. There's always a little bit of a variation. And we know the gene pool is quite big. So there's a lot of kind of like opportunities for some changes.
Yeah.
Um, but also, the experience of the baby in the womb is shaped by um, whatever is happening around them. So if you had a kind of like, I'm talking really about extreme cases here, if you had a very, very stressful pregnancy, then of course that has some sort of effect on the fetus. And so there's all these
How
kind of like
child's
discussions
temperament influences their
um,
development.
on genetics influencing kind of like to the children's temperament, but also environmental factors.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's a lot in it, isn't there?
yeah.
I guess, if is there any questions coming through about temperament at this moment?
Yeah.
No? Hopefully we've explained the basis of what we're talking about today, which is, what is temperament? But so we might talk about some of the research. So Antonia, oh, Yeah,
Yes,
that's where we're going.
yeah.
So, in your research, so you talk about three main dimensions of temperament. So, can you just walk me through what are the three main dimensions and what does it look like on daily activities for a parent
Yeah.
with different temperaments?
So temperament again, it's a big word, but we have like a couple of kind of like subsections in that.
Yeah.
The first one, and also apologies, I'm going to throw kind of like a few complicated words on you.
And I'll ask about them.
Yes. The first one is surgency. And surgency is basically the precursor for what we were talking about, extrovert, introvert.
Yeah.
So a baby who's very kind of like active has a high score in surgency. So it's kind of like demanding lots of attention, is very bubbly, so to say, smiling a lot. Whereas a baby who's a little bit kind of like lower on this scale is a little bit more kind of like laid back, a little bit quieter, enjoys kind of like maybe not that many people around it. So all of that is, again, I want to say totally normal. So there are just some babies who prefer to have kind of like maybe one or two people around them, and other babies, they thrive in the kind of like big, bubbly, buzzing environments. And all of that is normal. Then the second dimension that we have that is negative affectivity. That is a little bit more linked to kind of like how easily a baby is stressed. So think about an environment where if you're kind of like, oh, something went wrong, we kind of like did kind of like deviate from our regular schedule, and all of a sudden the baby is a little bit more distressed.
I think I have a child like that.
Oh yeah.
Definitely likes the routine. Is that what negative affective likes?
Well, the negative affective, if you have a kid who scores a little bit higher on the negative affectivity,
Yeah.
it's easily distressed.
Okay.
It's also harder to soothe. So that again, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It's just kind of like what the baby's temperament is like. So they're just babies or even people. I mean, we all know different people who are kind of like easily distressed or quicker distressed than others.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of like who we are. And the way we can support these kids is to create environments where we can help them to calm down and to soothe themselves a little bit and to create a loving environment.
So it's like accepting where they're at, but
Exactly.
like so where your child is at, and then working with that and being responsive.
Exactly. Being responsive to your child and not seeing it as something kind of like you need to push your kind of like kid through the situation, but seeing kind of like where's my kid coming from and how can I support my kid in the way that it is.
Yeah. And then the third one I've got noted down as that regulatory capacity.
Exactly. So the regulatory capacity, also sometimes called orienting, is how much does a kid need? So how quickly can they shift their attention from one thing to another thing? So we know some kids, they're just like they play with one toy for a very long time and they're just very happy about it. And other kids are just like, nah, give me something new. Give me something new. I need a new toy. So
that one's like a range, a scale.
There's always a scale. So we always kind of like create, there's no one fits all, but we also know that from ourselves. So sometimes, even though I say like I'm a little bit more on the introvert scale, I'm also sometimes in environments where I feel kind of like, oh, I'm enjoying this very much. So there's no kind of like scale where you say like, I'm always here. And the same happens with the baby. So it's not always in this, but it really depends. And also in kids' development, we know they go to phases, they go through waves. It's never going to be, if this is like this, it's going to be always like this, but it's more kind of like the base. You're maybe kind of like a kid who enjoys quite regular routines, and that is fine. This is what you enjoy in the moment. But there are also maybe sometimes circumstances where you realize like, oh, this is actually something new. My baby or my child really enjoys this kind of like new expertise or the new way to explore things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
So also with regulatory is, for example, a baby that can soothe himself. So we know that
that'd be a good skill.
Oh, it would be a great skill. Absolutely. But then again, kind of like doesn't mean as parents you're doing something better than others if you have a baby who can actually soothe themselves.
Yeah.
Because it might be just the genetics, the temperament is just giving us the raw materials for that.
Parents aren't doing anything right or wrong necessarily. There is just sometimes that innate temperament, and that's what we're talking about within children, and they've just got that range.
Yeah.
That suits them. Excellent. I guess
before we move on, sorry, we've just had a question come through going back to when you were talking about temperament and the main impact on that is probably genetics, but also could potentially be that experience, that pregnancy experience. So just Mona was just asking for some more information about how a stressful pregnancy may impact a baby, if you have that.
So if you so there's some sort of research, and of course I want to highlight again that if you experience a highly stressful pregnancy, that doesn't mean your child is going to turn out this way. So there is no cause this and that. So it's just kind of like research that shows there is kind of like maybe a link between them, but it doesn't mean that you need to be more stressed if you feel like you have a stressful pregnancy. These are kind of like not, if this, then absolutely this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's more the links that are kind of like between them.
And I feel like sometimes babies are born, so the temperament sets a scale or a range where they sit on a very larger scale. And I think so if you've had a slightly higher pregnancy or birth experience, which can happen, and we're all very grateful when we have this beautiful bundle of joy in our hands. So I think when you do have that, when the baby comes out, they may be slightly on that higher end of their range, but it doesn't mean that they can't, that can't be shifted with, nurture and care. And as the situation, calms down. So nothing is set in stone, is it?
No, nothing is set in stone. And the best you can do is create a loving and supportive environment, because we know a loving and supportive environment is buffering so much in the kids' development and boosting it actually. But yeah, so as I said, kind of like sometimes there is kind of like if you have a very, very stressful pregnancy, sometimes it may be kind of like that the kid is a little bit more harder to soothe at a specific time. But that, of course, doesn't mean it's always the case.
Yeah.
So, and again, if you are a little bit worried about something, visit your GP, ask the questions, maybe kind of like with professionals from daycares to get their view on something. So.
And I think that leads into as well, so part of the research that I've been looking at around, children as they become preschoolers and start their school journey, temperament comes into effect as well. So some of the main temperaments in my research in particular is around shyness. And I think it's being responsive and adaptive to children and understanding if they're going to be shy, that is part of, and they're sitting on a range of that shyness level, and at home they may be really comfortable, but it's really important that as parents that we understand that they may be on the shyer scale, and that we actually can't turn all children into this extrovert because it's just not within their range, which can be a bit hard within our society.
And I mean, imagine like for yourself, you kind of like, you're me as an introvert, I'm being thrown into kind of like a big bunch
putting
of
in front
kind
of a
like
camera
something.
today.
And I'm all of it, exactly. So, in a very uncomfortable situation. But again, kind of think about like sometimes we need to be fair. We need to kind of like have our kids on board. We need to understand where they're coming from. If I have a child who's naturally a bit shyer, then do I want to throw them into a space where they are kind of like surrounded with many, many people? And honestly, adults can be scary for kids. So they're double the size, and all of a sudden you have to interact with them. It's not an environment that can be great for all of the kids.
No.
So, and it's totally fine to be shy. And I think sometimes we live in a society where that one is not regarded so positively. So we always kind of like see these people kind of like who are super bubbly, outgoing, and we admire them. But shyness is actually, it's a good quality.
Yeah, it's got its strengths, doesn't it? Especially, so I imagine some parents at home are nodding their heads. I think as well that there's other children can be unsociable, and that they actually just don't wish to work with like to be in groups as well, so that they actually have a preference to play alone. So I think when parents are just giving them nice encouragement, talking about their confidence levels and making sure we're not pushing them to be outgoing and something they're not as well is really important. And then we have kids, and it's a very small proportion of the population, if you like, that really just don't want to. They feel anxious, they feel avoidant, they feel fearful in that situation. And I think it's finding those situations where parents can talk naturally because they're usually very comfortable with parents. We hope that they are. And I think most mums and dads would understand that, that they're finding situations where we can talk and build their confidence in a really natural way. And I think some of the research points to, arriving early to situations and, so that nothing really throws them off and slowly easing them into social situations is a real
and
part of it.
explaining what is happening,
Yeah.
just explaining the situation, go into interaction with your kid. Because I mean, I'm much better prepared if I know what's going to happen. And
I have children like that. As long as I give them that 5-minute warning at the park, so I'm not saying we're going now. It's always preparing them and, preparing them for, oh, tomorrow we're going to be doing this. And they may forget, and that's okay. But like you said, if it helps them plan based on their temperament, that's, I think, the best type of parenting skills that the research supports. Leads me into one question though. Is there like a harder temperament, do you think, for parents to deal with? So what's one that parents find more challenging, or the research kind of might lead to that?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit harder is, of course, if you have a baby who cries a lot. That is a lot. It's a lot of demanding on the parents' nerves. So that is technically what we would say kind of like a little bit harder. But as again, we want to highlight nothing is wrong here. So just because something is harder doesn't mean you're failing or the baby's failing or something. It's just kind of like taking into your baby's needs into account. And to see kind of like what can we actually do to support my kid. So what are the factors that play into that? If I have a baby that cries a lot, what can we do? And also what can you as parents do to recharge? Is there someone you can talk to? Is that someone who can maybe just take over for half an hour so that you can recharge? Because that is very important too, because we know
Is that the surgency, though, that you were talking about before? Is that
the negative
affectivity?
affectivity? So the negative affectivity is the one where a baby kind of like cries a lot, it's harder to soothe. Because we know also there is a lot of interactions between parents or caregivers and the baby. So if you, I don't know if you've realized that, but if you're very relaxed and you had a kind of like a great morning, great sleep, then all of a sudden your kid is much calmer. And so
so they feed off each other.
Yes, exactly. So it's a bi-directional
personal experience.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's also what we experience here in the baby lab. So if the parent arrives here and we create an environment where they feel kind of like, oh, I can sit down, I can relax, my kids are playing, then immediately we realize that the kid is having a great, great time. And honestly, what we see here is the kids are ripping the place apart in the sense that they play with all the toys. And they're saying like, oh, can we go back? But that is playing into that. So of course it's harder to say that, oh, you just need to be relaxed, because we know like, oh, I'm lacking sleep. I'm kind of like, the schedule is full on. But if you can, try kind of like create ways for you where you can recharge as a parent. Is there kind of like maybe the 5 minutes on the toilet? Ways to exactly, just finding kind of like little moments that are just for you, and your child will benefit from that too.
So then is there a temperament that makes parenting easier?
Yes.
Is parenting ever easy?
I liked the idea of the toilet.
I mean, of course, there is, if we have a baby that smiles a lot and is kind of like smiling at strangers and everyone is saying like, oh my God, what lovely, cute baby. That is, of course, the temperament characteristics that are usually tend to be easier. But of course, it really also depends on you as a match. What is my personality? So for example, I could struggle. So me as an introvert person, if I had a kind of like a child that is very extrovert, that could be a challenge too. So there's not always kind of like one size that fits all, or where we can say like, oh, this is definitely harder or this is definitely easier. It depends on the kind of like a match or mismatch. So that we feel more happy maybe with an extrovert kid if we're kind of like ourselves an extrovert, or the other way around. So if we recharge and recreate kind of like environments that are quieter for us, then maybe the kid enjoys that one too. So there's again no one size fits all.
I think approach. As well, like part of the research that I read as well talks about like scaffolding. It's like building on, like reflecting back and validating what we see with children as well. I think is really important, especially with those high bundles of energy. So you might have a mum, look at my tower, mum, look at my tower. And I'm like, where you start to not like the word mum. That
Yeah.
was me.
Is that what you refer as high attention seeking?
High attention, yeah, like high on that the urgency, is that right?
Yeah.
Did I use that? Yeah. So I often find as well, like if you actually acknowledge and you just build on that, so you scaffold, you echo back what the child, I see that really tall tower you built, and then you validate that child's experience. Sometimes that's enough rather than constantly providing extra stimulus. Would you say that that works as well for babies as well through to preschool?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works kind of like, I mean, that works with me, that works with you. So sometimes it's just creating this environment and see kind of like, what is my kid actually responding to?
Yeah.
It's just, you don't need to be the entertainer.
Yeah.
You can simply validate what the kid is doing. So look at the big tower. Oh, yes, I can see you're building a big tower.
Yeah, providing that connection.
Providing the connection, communicating with
Yeah.
your kid in that respect, and to see kind of like, hey, do we need to create more environments? Do we need to create bigger kind of like,
Yeah. Well, on environments then, I guess. So we're going to dive into a little bit about nature, nurture, or both. Oh, we've got a question.
We have a question.
Yeah, a couple of.
Sorry, I'm stealing your microphone.
No, all good. A couple of questions and comments. So Camilla just made a comment, say she loves hearing that nothing's set in stone. Thank you. Easing her mind. So she was quite anxious during her pregnancy, but it sounds like her son is absolutely thriving. He's bubbly, happy, strong-willed, and a little bit fiery. So good luck.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for the comment.
But yes, I think as you've talked about, it's not necessarily like the pregnancy isn't probably the big part. It's the genetics, and coming into a loving and caring environment is going to support them to have the best of their temperament that they can. There is another question just asking if temperaments are fixed or if they will change over time. Is that something you wanted to answer now, or?
So that's kind of like the difference between temperament and personality. So temperament is something that is relatively stable throughout infancy, throughout early childhood. However, we know we have changed. We change throughout our lives. So it is nothing that is set in stone. It's just our raw material. So it's just who we are. So from kind of like perspective, I'm a bit more introvert. So I enjoy it. But that doesn't mean that I can't be extrovert in specific situations. So it is, our personality is shaped by the experiences that we make, the people we're connecting with. So it's not only kind of like you as a parent, but also at some point, the peers are going to play a huge part.
How do you measure temperament? So we were talking about some of those temperaments before in your research. Because I imagine if they're quite stable, are they measured by just a general questionnaire from parents? Or?
Exactly. So most of the temperament, of course, especially in babies, because we can't ask babies directly, most of the research has been done via parental questionnaires. And these can be questions like, for example, hey, over the last 2 weeks, think about kind of like the following situation. How often is your baby smiling to other people? How often, or how do you feel on a scale from 1 to 7? How easy do you think is your baby?
And I think that's the same with like preschoolers as well. We ask general questionnaires of parents, and again, because it is over that range of maybe the week or 2 week period, it is providing you the stability, and it goes down to that whole. It seems relatively stable over a lifetime, or at least over a childhood, because it's that range from the high to the low of that particular child, which might be different to, child number 2 that you have, or child number 3, or, the child in the playgroup that you might be sitting with. So that's important as well. So on nature, or do you want?
Yeah, quickly on that, is also think about temperament more as kind of like the bigger picture, because we know sometimes kids' development comes in waves. So for example, if I have a baby who's just started to teeth, of course, everything is a bit more upsetting.
You're right on that high.
You're right, exactly. Then at this specific time, you're right on the high age of kind of like our negative activity or our kind of like soothing abilities are very, very low.
But it's not going to be the same as that baby next
Exactly.
to, yeah.
Exactly. So temperament is something, it's just kind of like the raw materials, and everything else is of course shaped by our experience. And that's why it's again so important to say like, hey, as parents, you have the influence
And why
kind of
what
like
works for me won't work for everyone as
exactly.
well. Right, especially around when it comes to teething.
Yeah, exactly. Baby number two, and
Yeah.
3, completely different.
So different.
There has been another question, and you might, I'm not sure if this will fit better within that nature, nurture, or both section, but I was going to say your name, but you've got hi. Well, they'd like to know the difference or how autistic traits impact temperament. Is that something that you've covered in your research, or is that something that's outside of that scope?
Yeah. So, of course, again, kind of like when I look at babies or very young kids, it's really hard to say that X, Y is because the kid is going to be autistic or is developing some ADHD characteristics. We know from the early infant research is there are a few kind of like signs that kids who are later diagnosed with autism may kind of like not look so much into kind of like the social interactions, so that it's when that's something we call joint attention. So joint attention is something then when we're in a conversation, so that we share our attention to something specific. So if you have kind of like a toy, we have our little monkey here, and you're talking with your kid about the monkey, or about specific toys or situations. This is where we can see that kids who are later diagnosed with autism, they don't interact or are not so involved into this joint attention. However, again, I wanted to highlight, it's just what's kind of like happening. It doesn't mean that if your kid is a little bit more distracted by something, that it's going to develop some autism.
Yeah, definitely like on that preschool scale as well. It doesn't just because you've got someone who is shy or avoidant, by no means is that definitely an indicator that they will have autism. It's just maybe people with autism have a higher population or percentage of some of these traits as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And similar to ADHD. So in the kind of like big topics of ADHD is this kind of like restlessness, kind of like the stereotypical pictures that we have that kind of like, oh, you switch your attention really fast back and forth. Some of the characteristics are evident in babies, but that of course doesn't mean that if you have a baby whose regulatory attention or is kind of like quickly kind of like constantly needs new stimulation is going to develop ADHD. That is not the case. However, in retrospective studies, sometimes we can see that, oh, those kids who actually are later diagnosed with ADHD, some of them are kind of like in the infant temperament traits. But again, it's kind of like, it's all about kind of like what you as a parent can do to support that. Because we also know from the ADHD research is that the best support and the best kind of like buffer effect is a loving and supporting environment.
Yeah.
So that is the biggest protective factor for that.
And often as well, like if you're always concerned, we always say as mums, trust your instinct if you're unsure. And if it's affecting your children, then obviously see professionals.
Exactly. Talk to kind of like professionals, to your
the
GP,
doctors.
kind of like the childcare, because they have kind of like the bigger picture. They know your child, they know their child in different situations. Because yeah, as we say, kind of like sometimes a shy kid is shy in a new environment, but maybe not shy in a home environment or anything else. So it's always, if you're concerned, talk to someone who knows your child, professional, and get the support or help you need.
So I guess what you're saying is it's not causative. Any particular part of temperament or type of temperament does not result in a child having a diagnosis. So you can't draw a line straight between them. Yeah. But there are potentially some aspects of temperament you're more likely to see.
Yes.
Yeah. Looking in hindsight. Yeah. Sebastian was asking about assessments for autism, probably not the perfect space for this, and what age they can be assessed. My understanding is around 3, sometimes a little bit younger, but generally older than that. Is when the assessments can be accurate.
Thank you for that.
Perfect question and answer. So should we move on, do you think, to nature and nurture? Like, well, I like it probably leads quite well into it. So I know that even myself as a parent, but parents can often feel guilty at times. Like, so we know that we sometimes blame ourselves or think that whatever is going on with our children, a behavior can sometimes be our fault. I think that weighs quite heavily on most. Maybe it's something we did during pregnancy, and we've touched a little bit on that, and or in the early weeks, that made a baby act in a particular way. So do you think anything temperament has to do? Sorry, I'll ask that again. Do you think temperament has much to do with that? If yeah,
Yeah, so as we already mentioned, there's a lot of genetics components
yeah,
in temperament. So it's definitely, again, I feel like it's the topic of today is that you as parents, you don't do anything wrong.
yeah,
It's just where kind of like the raw material your baby is born with, and there are kind of like phases where it's going to be easier and harder, or harder in general, because being a parent is hard.
hard. So how much do you think is genetic? So if I was anxious and sensitive as a kid, am I going to have an anxious and sensitive child?
Well, that's again the cause relation. So it is, we really don't want to say that, or if you're anxious now, you're going to be an anxious child.
Yeah.
Um, because there is so much more what parents can do to support kids. So if you experience or if you have a kid who's a little bit anxious, we can slowly build their confidence. And confidence is not built by kind of like, hey, just do it, but it's kind of like step by step introducing the kid to new situations. See where they are at. How do they react? What can we do differently next time? Just learning from these interactions to see. Because I mean, honestly, I was very anxious as a child. I hated speaking in public or even kind of like talking to someone, and here I am. So I think that is always good to see that nothing is set in stone.
Yeah.
If we create environments where we feel kind of like supported, where we feel like, oh, actually, I can do this, and we have these achievements, I think as a parent, you always see that when kids manage to do something and they're so proud of themselves, you can see their confidence building, and this is what you want to do. So if you have an anxious child and you create an environment where you all of a sudden see your kids thrive and they build this confidence step by step, that's what you want to create. And it can look very different from one kid to another kid. So it's not just, it works for my kid, so it should work for your kid. It doesn't work like that. So it's just kind of like having different tools and see kind of like what works. Do we need to kind of like go together in specific situations? Do I need to explain a little bit more what is going on there? What are kind of like the steps that we can do? For example, if I realize my kid is very anxious in very busy environments, maybe just don't go to an event that has like 400, 500 new people, but maybe we can start slowly with kind of like 5 kids around, or 5 adults, or kind of like what are the kind of environments that we
local playgroup.
go to your local playgroup.
Local
Exactly. Go to your local playgroup and see what are the different situations my kid is responding to. And of course, sometimes creating these environments so that you can see how your kid is responding to it. It's also what helps them and helps you to actually detect like who's that? Because I think it's also something that parents realize from very early on, that they see like, whoa, I have this 2-3 month-old baby, and I can see how different they are.
Yeah.
That even though they can't speak, they can't talk, they're crying a little bit, but basically they're just kind of like little kind of like babies.
Yeah, but you can still
You
see
can
that
still see
inborn temperament.
exactly.
Yeah. And it's an interaction. Does it change how parents talk to the child when they've got different temperaments? Like how does it affect me as a parent? Is it me affecting the child, or is it the child affecting me?
Yeah, so that is now building into the research that we do here in
Yeah.
the baby lab. So we were looking at families with a 4-month-old baby, and sometimes you think kind of like, okay, how much are we going to talk?
Yeah,
Or
4 months is very young, isn't it?
they can't kind of like, they don't speak, they don't do much, but we are actually in interaction with them, and this is how kids learn to thrive. Is not only kind of like the amount of we talk to them, but it's the way how we talk with them.
Yeah.
Because if you think about a communication situation is we're not talking to someone, but we're in interaction with people.
Yeah.
So we're in a communication situation where I'm talking to you right now, but you're also responding to me. And this is what we call in the literature, what we call communicative turns.
Turns. Okay.
So we're having a turn taking. So I'm kind of like giving you some sort of signals. Okay, I'm done talking now, and you jump on to that.
With an enter response here or
Exactly.
reaction.
A reaction that you say like, oh, you're nodding, you're smiling.
Sometimes I look over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the way that we're interacting with each other.
Okay.
And we're doing this from very early on. So we're doing this with 4-month-old babies already. So,
Wow.
and it's not only that we as parents are acting like that, but it's also coming from the baby's temperament. How much are we kind of like talking to them? And what we actually see that it's related. So the amount of kind of like the way how we interact with babies is linked to the baby's temperament.
Okay.
So for example, what we actually found in our research is that babies who are kind of like a little bit quieter, a little bit more laid back, I would say, they create more interaction situations. So that again kind of like highlights how important this kind of like bidirectionality between parents and their kid is.
So the parents would talk more?
If the parent would talk more,
No?
but they are more in kind of like the back and forth exchanges,
There's more turn
taking.
Okay.
If the baby is quieter. So
Wow.
again, kind of like doesn't mean a quiet baby doesn't mean kind of like something goes wrong, but it kind of like actually creates a situation where there's more back and forth allowed. And we know that the back and forth is actually the link for later language development. So maybe that's something, Sheena, you can talk about language and temperament or personality.
I think there's a lot of research as well that talk about when preschoolers and so 4 and 5-year-olds are on the ground talking with their parents. Parents' vocab or turn taking, it might even be, is actually usually quite directive. It's quite short. But when they read to the children of that age group as well, parents' language becomes more complex. It's more detailed. Sentence structure is longer, and you generally ask more questions back and forth of the child. So they find that both are very relevant, and both work in with different temperaments and are both needed for all temperaments, if you like, especially in that shy and an avoidant type work as well. But the language development side of things, the reading a book is so valuable. And I think we've talked about this a lot with babies as well, but with preschoolers, that development of language, the more complex turn taking that parents have happens a lot with reading. So it's quite crucial. And there's been lots of studies done on language development when we read to a child or if we read less to a child. And a screen doesn't replace that, which I think most parents intuitively know as well. Even if you've got a storybook on a screen, it misses out on those complex structures, like what do you see in this picture, and that story and conversation, which is a real foundation.
Pause between kind of like a book you can stop and you can go in interaction with, and you can say like, oh, do you remember kind of like other aspects of that? Whereas the screen sometimes
it just reads a story.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's very different. But yeah, there's a lot in that as well. How did you study babies turn taking? Like, how does that even come about?
Oh yeah, we sit there and we count turns. No,
watch flies on the wall,
exactly,
broom, that kind of thing.
No, we have little recording devices, and so we're very grateful for parents who are participating in this research, because we know sometimes it can be quite a challenge to include research in your daily activities. So we really want to thank the parents who were part of that. We have a little recording device, and this little recording device basically records whatever the baby is exposed to. So thanks to modern technology, there are some algorithms behind, and the algorithms extracting how many words is the child actually exposed to. And that can be quite interesting if you think about like over the course of the day, it's like how much is my baby actually exposed to different words? And you'd be surprised. So sometimes your baby is going to overhear around 12,000 words.
12,000 words.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is, of course, not always directed to the baby,
Yeah.
but it's just overhearing that in the conversations the babies are surrounded with. And so that's
Is that generally from a parent, or is that from all social situations?
kind of like all social situations. And that's quite interesting. So, and also this little recording device, or the machine learning device, is also extracting how much is the baby talking. Because we know a baby is already giving some sort of output from it. Of course, no real words, but I mean, we've all heard these kind of like very cute, gurgly,
The
or
babbly.
the babbly, or the vocalizations that are just like, ah,
Yeah,
that the babies
okay.
are giving. And this is their communicative signals. So this is how a baby actually communicates with us. So they're saying kind of like the moment the baby is kind of like articulating something, we're responding to that. And this is what we call the communicative turn with a baby. So of course, it's not like a real word, full on blown conversation about philosophical topics. But it's more a conversation that we have in the sense that we're repeating what the baby does.
Yeah.
If I hear a baby who says like ba, we naturally go in and say like ba, ba, or ma, ma.
And your tone changed too when you did that.
Oh yeah, and it's again something that I know sometimes parents feel a little bit awkward to do, is this baby talk. The baby talk, or the parentese talk, is something that we do naturally with babies. It's this like, oh, hello, look at you. You're such a cute baby. So sometimes we feel a little bit awkward doing that.
Well, you would to the camera, but I've seen it naturally, and it just comes. You can't hold back.
No, you can't hold back. And you shouldn't hold back on that, because we know this baby talk is helping your baby to figure out what's going on in the environment.
And do different temperaments have then, so we talked about a little bit of baby babble, and so that can be probably even earlier than 4 months, because I'm just picturing the little 4-week-old baby I was holding on the weekend. Does temperament change? Maybe is it as early as that you can see that the babble might be less than maybe the baby next to you? Is that possible?
Exactly. So
Okay.
that is definitely possible, so that we know not only in the conversations that we have, but also the amount or the frequency types of babbles.
Yeah.
So babies who are naturally maybe a bit more kind of like on the higher arousal, they're maybe a bit more talkative. But again, it really also depends on the situation, because we all know that, oh, my baby at this specific time of the day was very talkative, and then all of a sudden, 3 hours later, it's not talkative anymore. So it really kind of like depends again, what are you capturing? How was the night? How was the sleep? And that is true for your baby too. So if you have one of the questions in these parental questionnaires is also kind of like, how much is your baby actually vocalizing or vocally active?
So that's some of the research we capture, isn't it, at BabyLab? So you mentioned the parent questionnaires. When you register for the BabyLab, we send out some questionnaires, and some of them are actually on temperament, which is really interesting. And you get a score back for your baby as well, or your child, on their temperament if you complete that one. And yeah, if you want to know more about your baby's temperament, you will receive at the end maybe kind of like a quick QR code or link where you can sign up for the BabyLab and the BabyLab register if you're keen on doing more research with us and helping to understand what's going on with the kids' development. Yeah.
You will receive an email that asks you to fill in kind of like a questionnaire, and that could be either for your infant temperament or for your child's temperament, because we know that it's not only kind of like infant research, but from Sheena, we also know it's over the span of childhood. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, some of the research on children. So I'm looking at particular 4 and 5-year-olds. So if there's parents out there with 4 and 5-year-olds, or maybe a bit older, you'll know that you've been through COVID, which was such an interesting social dynamic when you talk about language development. Part of the research, we're looking at language in particular for these children and how their temperament interacts with that. We know that there was this exclusion. So, for instance, how I might say dog is very different to maybe how my husband or how other people around me say the word dog. And children can very much latch on to, if they're not exposed to that diverse way of sounding that word out, they very much associate just my tone, the way I sound out the word dog,
to dog, and that doesn't broaden or diversify their understanding of how different words and different language can affect their language development, if that all makes sense. So it's really quite interesting, and we do find that with more exposure, kids catch up. They're so diverse. They're so nothing that we can really do wrong really affects them for a very long time, because they're so diverse, and their ability to socially then expose and their drive to want to play and communicate is so strong that whatever happens, they catch up. So we're just really much looking at as well as are children who just stand back a little bit more, are they catching up a little bit at a lesser speed? But we're very confident that they're catching up, which is really good as well.
And to that extent, sometimes it's catching up is not only what the kid is actually saying, because if we look at these COVID kids or kind of kids who are a little bit shy, what research also shows, like maybe the way how they express language is a little bit different to other kids, because they're forced in a situation where they have to speak and they're clearly not very comfortable in this situation. However, if we measure something that is called receptive, so the perception of language, these kids are actually doing quite well. So
it's how they understand.
It's how they understand speech and language.
I know I understand, but I'm just not going to say it right
Exactly.
now.
And this is
They need to understand before they can speak.
Exactly. It's just like, if you don't understand, how are you supposed to speak? So, and this is what we observe in shy kids, is their understanding is kind of like absolutely on the same level, if not even higher than other kids, because they're just like, they absorb like little sponges everything that's around it.
So it comes back to those like different temperaments have those different strength levels. And I think as I think someone was describing their children as strong-willed. I often say, like that about one of my kids, they're going to be a fantastic CEO one day. It's just going to be hard to get there. And I think that's where temperament kind of comes in with those different strengths and abilities on languages.
We do have quite a few questions.
Okay.
Going back to talking about book reading with your child, which I'm a speech pathologist background, so I'm fangirling on this conversation because it's all the things that I learned many years ago. But it's talking about book reading and having a child who repeats phrases from books and things from their everyday world, and they're wondering whether this is is this just a part of their normal development, and wanting them to sort of develop their question and answer. So maybe, I'm not sure whether you'll go into sort of that question and answer in your practical tips.
We're gonna go. We can come back to the practical tips, but we can still kind of like talk a little bit. Maybe you can tell us from your speech pathology background what you think.
I mean, a child repeating what is going on in their environment is their way of learning. So they're repeating what they're hearing, and the more that they hear something, the more they'll repeat it, and then that's their way of learning language, and being able to then utilize that in an appropriate place and time. So.
Exactly.
I think it's amazing if you're reading with your children and they're engaging in that and using those words in other parts of the day. And it's our job as parents to, I guess, support them to see when is the appropriate time to use that language, and guiding that for them. But never discourage speaking.
No.
Yeah, no.
And I think it's I hope you can still hear me. I think if it's part of as well, they can't, their self-thought process is not internalized yet. So I think I was doing this up until like 6, 7.
I'm still doing that.
So children don't have this self-internalization. So we often think in the language that we speak, and we will speak out loud for a really long period of time, and correct me when I hit the stage right, but I think it's around the 5 or 6 that we don't until we switch over into internal thought. And then that's when you might find that children won't repeat or won't want you to repeat everything that they say. we've disconnected. That's not a big thing. So I think that that's really important
Exactly.
as well. So repeating everything your child says does help them, and then they'll stop expecting that when they realize that they can think inside their own head. Sometimes they feel like I've even noticed with my own kids, sometimes they think I can hear what's going on in their head. But I notice that that happens at a lot later stage in life. But yeah, that really helps them with their thought and cognitive, so the thought process.
Yep. And exactly.
Anything else that we missed?
Nope.
Nope. I'm not sure if we've thrown you off. Yeah.
No, sorry. A couple more questions. Cynthia was talking about rhyming, asking if rhyming songs is beneficial. I say 100%.
Oh, 100%. The best you can do is rhyming, singing, nursery rhymes. That is, I think, for early reading skills, language development. I mean, there is a reason why we sing so much to babies and why everything rhymes. So rhyming is actually one of these precursors. That another very complicated term is called phonological awareness. And phonological awareness is something that we need to learn to read. So we can detect the rhyme. So we can say, oh, now I can't remember a rhyme. But rhyming is actually kind of like very important to detect patterns in language, to see kind of like what sort of speech sounds are the words starting with. What are kind of like the correspondings between letters and sounds? All that from the speech pathology practice. So rhyming, singing is what you can do with your kid. And it's absolutely enjoy.
Sebastian talks about difficulty getting his 1.5-year-old to focus on books. So wondering if there might be any tips to encourage focus, and commenting on the fact that they're holding the book upside down 90% of the time, which they're holding a book is great for me. I'm okay with that.
No, absolutely, because the early reading skills, or what you do with a kid at this age, is not so much about their reading, but it's also the pre-literacy skills, in the sense kind of like flipping pages, going through what do you see there, and taking the book as something that can help you talking with your kid. Doesn't need to be the story, because an 18-month-old baby is not really interested in the story itself, but it's more about kind of like what you do with that. Take that as an opportunity to create maybe stories around that, and see kind of like, hey, do you like giraffes? Do you like pandas? What is that one looking like? So using books as a medium of conversation. So, and everything else will come later.
Yeah, I think just on that as well, like I find as well, if you gamify part of that as well, so maybe counting how fast they can turn the page, so it's not necessarily about reading the story, it's interest in the story. Or are you counting the pages, or reading it upside down is maybe okay, because that's just the way of introducing language, like we're looking at this upside down, and that's, I think that makes it all the same fun.
What sort of words do you use when you talk to your baby, using different kind of like words, interactions, and figuring out like, what does my child actually, what do they like? Maybe they're not interested in that topic, but maybe it's a completely different kind of like field. Maybe also go to the local library and see kind of like, hey, what can we do? And let the kid guide the learning, because kids are creating their own environment. They are co-creators. We are kind of like just there to support them and to see what they need, but they're going to tell you specifically what they want and what they need.
Yeah, great. Thank you. A couple of more questions have come through. One from Lucy, wondering about chatter, and should she continue to chatter throughout the day, talking about what she's doing, or is it more a conversation that's important with their child? Do you want me to give you the second one, which is slightly different, or do you want to focus on that one first?
Let's focus on that one first. And I think both of that is important, because I see language development as something like a mathematical equation. So you need kind of like input to get some output. So without the diverse input from day-to-day activities that you just described, like what's going on. So now we're making breakfast. For this breakfast, we're cutting, and you're commenting on what you're doing. You're giving your baby lots of words and lots of opportunities to learn how to use words in different contexts. Also, that we use food-related items more in the kitchen area. And then we go to the living room or to the playroom and we're using different types of word. All that is creating environments where baby can actually pick up. But of course, if they're kind of like your kid is responding to something, so while you're cutting and your baby says like something, you can say like, oh yeah, we're cutting. This is how you interact with your kid. It doesn't necessarily need to be kind of like, as I said, a serious conversation about something. It's just responding to whatever your kid is offering you.
She does also, sorry, Lucy also mentioned wondering if she should be feeling guilty for not talking all the time. Please don't.
Please. Again, kind of like you do as parents, parenting is hard and you do whatever you can do is the best. And it is totally fine if you need a quiet moment and you feel like, oh, I'm not really ready to talk and to chat.
And I think it comes down to parents' temperament as well. Like it's okay for children to experience different temperaments in people around them as well. And I think that's just as crucial. And it actually could be playing to their temperament as well, like understanding higher and lower, quieter, louder periods, which I think is crucial for society as well. I think I'm about back on the chatter as well. Like I would often count steps or, talk out loud, like explain when I was changing a nappy or things like that, things that I was going to do. And I think that also in the science, like kind of helps the internal thought process that's going on in my mind also helps that language development with children and then their own internalized switch when it does happen as well, which I think is quite crucial.
But again, please don't feel guilty if you don't do that because we all have kind of like rougher days, better days. It is the bigger picture that we're looking at, not at kind of like specific points in time. So like, hey, you remember this Tuesday at 9 a.m. you weren't talking that much. That's not going to happen.
I think it's more about that quality interaction with your child that you're having and giving them what you can based on your own temperament as well as theirs. We do have another question about bilingual and trilingual households and concerns that children may have speech delays wondering what language to speak to their child in. I could answer, but I'll let you.
Yes, you please jump onto that because that is still out there in the books. Multiple languages is not causing language delays. So that is 100% crystal clear from the research that we know. Speaking multiple languages is actually super, super beneficial for your child. You may sometimes notice that your kid is maybe having a different sized vocabulary in one language than in the other. But if you think about like, hey, this is our little monkey here. And if a bilingual child has 2 words for the same monkey, that's actually 2 words instead of kind of like just one. So it really depends on how do we count our vocabulary development. So what we also know, knowing more languages is not only beneficial for your kids' development in the sense of cognitive development, early math skills, but it's also very beneficial for us as adults because it reduces your dementia risk. So learning languages is always great, whether you're kind of like a newborn or an older middle-aged adult or so clearly speaking multiple languages is very, very beneficial for your kid. You need to find a way that suits you as a family. So again, there is not kind of like a research that says like you have to do it this way. It really depends on kind of like your family environment. So some people, for some families, it works like that. One parent, one language, or maybe a third language comes into play as a kind of like joint communication. It really depends on what you do. What you can do is creating kind of like these environments. So for example, bedtime routines are being done in one language or kind of like play interaction in a different language. So you need to find play groups, finding kind of like parents with multiple languages too, and kind of like talk to them how they do that. Talking kind of like so that your kid has also peers in the same language, because we know that kids growing up in Australia, at some point their peers are going to speak English. And so they might be kind of like more English dominant. So what can we do to create an environment where the other languages, the other cultures are supported too? And from the speech pathology perspective?
Basically the same. I would say speak to your child in your strongest language. So if you're at home, you know, as Antonia said, you might choose to make it different, but you might choose to speak to your child in your native language. That's your strongest language. That's going to give your child the best foundations to then build the other languages onto. And then you might speak to your child in English when you're out at the shops, because that's the language that you're speaking to everyone else at the shop. So, or you might speak to your child in a third language when grandma's around. So your child will adapt and will learn. Yes, they might have technically slower language development in some aspects, but my understanding of the research, which was a little while ago, I've been out of the field for a bit, but once they hit 6, they will well and truly catch up, if not exceed their peers in their language development.
Exactly.
So don't be afraid, and please, expose your children to your languages.
And with that respect on the kind of like on speaking to your child in the dominant language, language is more than just words. It's also kind of like a medium how we communicate our emotions. So it's more than just kind of like you're giving the tools for your kid's vocabulary development, but you're also giving your kid information about how do we talk about feelings? What sort of emotions can be kind of like transmitted here? Because if we think about like some, for example, English is my second language. So if I were to kind of like speak in a topic that is very kind of like close to my heart, I feel much more comfortable to do that in German, because this is where I have my emotional language, where I feel kind of like I realize like the nuances between words. So that if I say like XY, XY or something, that I may kind of like don't get this detail in English because it's my second language. However, if I do kind of like the same in German, I can kind of like really dive into that and say like, oh, actually, this is how I feel. This is how kind of like we have different words of feelings in different languages. So the one word in one language doesn't necessarily translate to the same as another language. So speaking to your child is great. And either language, speaking to your child, with your child, is the best that you can do for emotional language development, everything.
Yeah, I agree. Haley is just asking, while we're on that topic, if it is ever confusing for children when the parent code switches or speaks different languages during one interaction.
Well, no, because kids are actually kind of like way smarter than we are. So we as adults, we get confused. If you think about it, like, oh, now you're switching languages. What are you doing here? However, we know that kids are way smarter than we are, and they're much faster in kind of like realizing.
Like when they do, like you said, at that age 6, which is their drive when they go to school and things like that. So when they're at school, they've got this drive to want to play and speak the dominant social language, if you like. And if that's English, and if you are switching between English and your native language at home, the child's going to pick up pretty quickly what is English and what is native. And I think as long as that connection and the communication is clear and responsive, I think that's the key part. And I think maybe we haven't quite developed all the clinical tests that really do help bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, all those different types of languages that children are absorbing. We don't have great assessments for all of it yet. I think they're starting to come through, which is fantastic. But like Antonia said, I think just to summarize, it's just you got to count it all and not just in one language. And I think that's what we've done in the past. We've only counted English if that was the dominant language. And that's where this kind of notion has come about, which is false, because we've said, and when investigating COVID children, we know that they will catch up because the drive to socially interact, to play, and that is the driver behind language. And hence why we do look at shy children and temperament, but the receptive language is there. And so it's that strength and balancing of it all, if that all makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that it?
And actually code switching is quite a strength of language development, because you have, so it's actually quite a skill to do that, because you can
fluent in 2 languages.
To be that fluent in 2 languages that no matter what, you can just kind of like go from one language immediately to another language. So that is something your brain does, and it's pretty cool that it does it.
Well, I think if we're done with some questions for now. All right.
About 20 minutes left.
So well, we have some practical tips, but keep the questions coming through. So we've got about 20 minutes left. So we're going to flip through some practical tips. Are you ready for some practical questions, Antonia?
Some practical questions. So going back to the temperament.
Yeah, go. So focusing a little bit then on temperament. So I'm just thinking practically, if I do have a bold, fearless baby who's into everything, and we might have already touched on it, but I'm just as a summary, what should I do as a parent?
Well, first of all, you reset yourself and say, like, how do I feel today?
Yeah.
Do I feel like I can create an environment that is loud, noisy, engaging?
Do I put the brakes on that child?
No.
No. No. I mean, that's good. That's stress.
So if you have a baby that thrives in this bubbly environment, you can create a kind of like an environment where there are lots of people, lots of different people, lots of engagement. This is what your baby is gonna love. And this is also what kind of like also practitioners do, or kind of like in speech environment. You look at the kid and say, like, how can I switch this kid on? And some kids, they absolutely love being hyped up. They just like, you give them more and they're just like, yes, we are doing that.
You said you're an introvert. I'm not saying it. But I've seen her with children and I know that you can switch it on. I think that's that range we talk about.
Exactly, that's the range. Or do we create a kind of like an environment where we basically maybe sit back?
Yeah.
We put on maybe some kind of like calming music.
So that'd be with the slow to warm up type.
Exactly.
Okay.
If it's a slow to warm up type, or your baby is a bit more kind of like enjoys quiet environments, you can create an environment that is slower, because you will see that if you throw in kind of like a baby who is actually more relaxed and wants to kind of like have a bit quieter place, if you throw that kid into this bubbly, high buzzing environment, it may create kind of like a little bit of just like, oh, what's going on here? I'm not sure. Of course, sometimes we can't avoid situations. So sometimes, of course, we have to go kind of like to our family festivities or kind of like big birthday parties, and we don't feel like. I mean, that is kind of like true for us as adults, but it's also sometimes true for the kids.
So it's, I guess, creating space to give that child the space to chill and relax, and also have that high energy. And that's probably true for most temperaments. It's just on that different range and different quantities.
Yes. And it's also totally fine to communicate that with other adults, because you don't owe everyone a smiling, happy baby.
Like my mother-in-law.
Yes.
She's not watching, it's okay. I love her.
So that is totally fine. So to say kind of like to communicate with other adults, because we hope that they will understand. So like, hey, look, I know you want to kind of like cuddle my baby and you really want to interact with my baby, but let's kind of like go slowly with that. I know that it's going to take some time to warm up. Let's get there when the kid is realizing, or when it's telling you, I'm ready for that. Just creating kind of like being an advocate for your child.
Yep.
It may kind of like not always be great, because you have to say no to some people, and we know people pleasing is what most of us do. But advocate for your child and see what is actually what your child needs, and to create these environments where when there is kind of like a big buzzing environment and you realize like your child actually needs some downtime, creating to see kind of like what can we do to create that within the environment.
And I think flowing through to what I'm finding with 4 and 5-year-olds as well. So for shy children, allowing those extra time to warm up to situations.
Exactly. Arrive early.
Avoid forcing that participation as well, especially very early on in anything. And like, so they may not want to hug or high five or jump in and play. They might do a side-by-side type play initially as well before they really integrate, and that's all fine. And I think preparing them beforehand, that was a really awesome tip as well, and celebrating some of those small social successes and wins as they start to understand. That's really important. And then what I was thinking too, from the unsocial child, so that's the child that really doesn't need, like, just is so happy to play by themselves, and I think respecting that in certain situations is very I think it plays to that child's strengths as well. So, and not forcing them to be in those social situations, and then letting them have those probably more time to play
Yes.
alone as well. And then for those smaller groups of people that are really social avoidant, that really feel a bit anxious or fearful, it's really trying to understand where that's potentially stemming from and coming from. And then so some of those other tips as well, by arriving early, talking to them, talking in cars, I find is really helpful with children as well, when you're not face to face in front of them if they are a bit nervous. And that's a really good way of building up some of those social skills that they might need.
And also for you to reflect on your own skills or what you need for
Yeah.
yourself, because we sometimes also know kind of like, oh, I have to go to this birthday or I have to do X, Y. But what is actually something that we as adults, we need in that moment? It's not only about the kid, but it's also what kind of like, am I calmer the moment I come in early and I can kind of like set back? What are my tasks to just, what do I need? And again, this kind of like reflects then the bidirectionality of communication and interaction.
Yeah.
I'm calm and I'm prepared and I know what I'm kind of like getting into.
Yeah.
I'm much better, but we just need to kind of like be aware of that situation maybe for ourselves.
And I think sometimes as well, like our society and culture doesn't always play to some of these temperament traits as well, but just understanding that. And I think talking and having those connections with your child as they understand, and then obviously trying to control that a little bit too with family and friends, like what you said. I think that's pretty important. Is there many questions coming through here, or are we? That's okay. We've got lots of toys in here.
Yeah, we have had a couple of questions in this realm around how do I support my child with different types of temperaments. So FIFA, if I've said your name correctly, is wondering how you can nurture a child who is all over the place, can't sit still. How can you support them to be a bit more regulated?
Yeah. Do you want to go from the parent perspective first?
I think allowing plenty of time to match that energy as well. So, I don't feel like we should feel guilty as a parent that we can't constantly match, but allowing spaces and times where we can provide that. I would go back to that echoing scaffolding type tool as well. So there's often look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, like, and giving them that when you can. It's not always going to be like, this is not a blame game because parents are so busy. I know, I've been there. I'm there. But it's just making sure that we do have that time in our day to acknowledge, see, respond, be responsive, and then prepare them just as much as maybe a slightly socially withdrawn child, that at certain times we can't be there for that total attention. I'm going to take 10 minutes out to do this. And they may need to be shorter spurts that we take away from that higher attention, because they'll need more time to allocate to higher attention activities and more attention from us. So I think it's trying to get that right balance. And look, as parents, I think there's a lot of guilt that we don't always get it right, and there's always going to be many demands in a day, but trying to understand that that's the temperament that you've got to work with, and you may need to just allocate a little bit more time to that attentive, responsive, building on that, their needs as well.
Exactly. Finding
babies are same, different.
Well. Or maybe with older kids, finding activities where they can be really exhaust themselves. So maybe it's a kid who just needs to run. Can we find like different sporting activities?
And probably on that as well, like babies do get exhausted from activities like, playing on a mat or on tummy time.
Or
So if it's a baby that has that high, it's those types of giving them lots of opportunities in the right amount of spurts, I guess, that suit their baby and that suit your baby to exhaust them.
Or maybe even creating some routines where we develop some sort of, okay, now we have our action activity time. And then right before bedtime, there are kind of like different steps that we can do, that we start kind of like playing a song so that we kind of like introduce now quieter times are coming. But again, that's kind of like not one size fits all. Maybe
even when 3 children came from the same parents.
Exactly. But highly active kids, they love attention. They love just kind of like different toys. And as Sheena said, as much as you can. But it's hard.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing as a parent is matching that energy when you're exhausted yourself. So don't be hard on yourselves and just do the
Yes.
best you can. And I think that we've covered this, but Haley was asking around tips to raise a really sensitive child. So you were talking before about just preparing them, giving them that
Exactly.
extra time and attention when they need it and supporting them through transitions.
Exactly. So talking through kind of like sitting there, talking through emotions, what is happening, maybe kind of like pretend to play. This is also what it kind of like play groups and what's, yeah, in general for kids development, very important is kind of like role play, kind of like going through this different situations. What do we expect? What can we do? What is something maybe that can help your child? Is it sensitivity in the sense of textures? So because I know kids, a lot of kids who are very, very sensitive, they also have this kind of like, oh, they can't kind of like have any tags or kind of like everything is
And
kind
then
of
you've
like
got other kids that just
speechy.
absolutely love tags.
Exactly. And that is just kind of like creating ways to see kind of like how can help my kid, trying different kind of like strategies, explaining a lot, sitting kind of like there, slowly introducing your kid to new environments. Also, getting other adults on board with that.
And I think as well, the reading, there's some great books and
Yes.
resources available. And reading is a really good activity to do with a child who likes that slow pace, where like, you know, turn taking seems to be sometimes clearer because you can ask questions, but then you can read a book, and that gives a child a lot of time to think and respond, especially when it is on things like emotions or, you know, big feels. And but yeah, there's some fantastic books out there as well for sensitive, and that can really help them talk and understand and open up about if it is a sensitivity that's around maybe social situations, that can really help them talk about what is going on as well. If it's a preschooler, that can help. We got anything else?
We've caught up on all the questions.
Caught up on all the
If I've missed
questions?
anything, please let me know.
Well, we're about we 2:20.
Yeah. So, and again, if you want to know more about your kid's temperament and you want to know kind of like more about your child's temperament, feel free to visit our baby lab and to sign up with us and to help us kind of like to learn more about kids, infants, babies, you maybe as adults.
So when you do sign up as well, we often send you through a lot of research as you sign up to the newsletter as well. So whatever we're studying and doing at the time. But yeah, so it's a really great space. But if there's anything in particular that you're interested in, or the research that we've talked about today, you can always shoot through a question. We've got a survey response, which I think we'll jump through to Julie soon, and we can respond to any comments that you put on that as well.
Yeah. Or if you want to know more about what we in the Baby Lab do, feel free to follow us on social medias.
Yeah, good point.
And see what we're out there. Whenever we have kind of like some tips, tricks, we're posted there.
Yeah.
To keep you informed about our research and what we know about kids and what we don't know about them.
We don't know a lot, but we're learning lots.
Yes, we're learning a lot.
Fantastic.
Thank you both. That was incredible. I love the idea, and I guess I have older children now, so I'm reflecting on what they were like when they were younger and the impact that their temperament has likely had on them as children and now as babies and now as younger children. But I love that idea that it's genetics that really sets where they're going to be, and then it's that care, compassion, time and love that you can give to your child that will nurture them in that space that they've got. And I think also just reinforcing that wherever your child is on those the range of those different aspects of temperament, there's positives to both. And so really just supporting your child to be the best they can within their own temperament, and accepting them for who they are, and just putting those supports in place. And yeah, it has really made me reflect on my very needy baby, who is now a very happy, loving, caring, cuddly 10-year-old, and how all those cuddles when she was little have really shaped her but also probably that's just her temperament, that she just loves that attention and need. And yeah, I love all of the conversation about book reading and language and the importance of that for children as they develop. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. There is a survey link that's just been popped up in the chat, and there is also a QR code that's now on your screen. If you can please scan those and provide us with your feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. So thank you all for your time, and we hope that you've all got something out of today. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Or if there are any more questions, last minute.
Thank you.